Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is episode 11 of PodTC. This month, I should say, for this episode, I'm joined by Jared Shank. He is the Senior Director of Military and Apprenticeship Initiatives and Special Projects at ODHE with OATM. So, how's it going today, Jared?
Oh, pretty good. It's a good day so far, anyway.
Yeah, we're recording a little bit beforehand, but this is kind of our Veterans Day special. So, for those of you who know Jared and the rest of you that just heard his title maybe for the first time, you can probably see where this conversation is going to go. We're definitely going to talk about military and or active military and veteran students and maybe how they intersect with transferring, things of that nature. So, I'm really excited for our conversation today. Hopefully, it's a good one. I know it'll be a good one. As long as I don't talk too much, I think it'll be a good one. So, um, Jared, I always start these off by asking my guests to tell me a little bit about themselves. We've been, around each other for a few years, but could you let the membership know, I said your name and like where you work and stuff, but anything else you'd like to share, like where you went to school maybe, or I know that you're a veteran yourself. So if you could shed some lights on that, that'd be great.
Yep. So again, as you said, my name is Jared Shank. I grew up here in southwestern Ohio, kind of in the middle of nowhere. If anybody's ever heard of St. Paris, it's a little town in between Urbana and Springfield. So kind of out in that area. Um, that's probably the most commonly known towns in that spot. Um, Grew up there, graduated high school, knew I wanted to do the military thing, and spent 4 years in the Army. Did paratrooper training with the 82nd Airborne and was field artillery. So I was jumping out of planes with howitzers. uh, one tour to Afghanistan, and then decided that I was done with the Army at that point in time and wanted to get out and go to school. So got out and went to Wright State for my undergrad, and then did my master's there as well.
Nice. And I know that, I feel like a lot, Southwest Ohio kind of makes sense. And a lot of veterans, I feel like Wright State does that kind of stuff well. And we'll kind of deep dive into maybe more or less what that'll look for. But I know that what years did you technically serve?
Served 2002 to 2006.
Yeah. So it's been a little bit, but not too far out. It was
It gets longer every day.
yeah, it's not World War II or anything. So
No.
so definitely more of a contemporary still look at kind of what we can do for the students that are coming through and maybe having similar experiences to your own, which I'm assuming has kind of helped guide you and maybe fine tune some of the things that you've done in your work and what you do on an everyday basis. So my next question is, how did you get involved with working with transfer and military students? Maybe that's in one lump. Maybe the two started out differently and intersected eventually, but how did that start for you?
Yeah, they kind of go together for me anyway. Um, so while I was an undergraduate student at Wright State, kind of early on, there were several positions, student worker positions that opened up in the Veterans Affairs office.
Nice.
At that time, it's now the Veterans and Military Center, but at that point in time, it was the Veterans Affairs office, basically the area that processed GI Bill benefits for students. So
Hmm.
I volunteered to do that and got selected, and so I had to learn all of the GI Bill stuff. And basically, you counseled students and in process them and did their paperwork and helped that along. And at that point in time, the office was inside the registrar's office. Occasionally would get a few questions every now and then about military credit. Somebody would stick their head out and say, "Hey, do you guys know anything about this training or this program or something like that?" And I would answer it. And I graduated with my undergrad, and very shortly after that, position opened up in the registrar's office that was for transfer articulation, essentially. Um, they had really no internal candidate at that point in time, and people were saying, "Hey," they started emailing me saying, "We think you'd be a good fit for this role. Why don't you apply?" I knew absolutely nothing. and had no idea what transfer credit was, any of
Hmm.
the acronyms. I mean, I was like a kid, cramming for an exam. I was going out on Wright State's page, the state's website, looking at everything I could, trying to figure stuff out. Long story short, I had a good interview, got hired. Also decided to start doing my master's degree at that point in time, since I was working for the institution. But while I was learning everything for transfer articulation, I was figuring out, this is how we process courses from a community college in here, how we get faculty to evaluate it. The wheels kind of started turning in my head, like we should be able to do this more for military. And I started looking in our like degree audit tables and stuff and seeing like there really weren't any articulation rules for anything military. So I thought, why not start start doing this? So I started asking the folks who process transcripts and whatnot. I was like, let me know when you get military transcripts in, and they said okay. So it was a fairly steady flow of transcripts coming in, and I just started sending them out to departments and faculty members and the folks who evaluated it, and started in processing and getting that stuff done. And I guess I started getting good enough at it that schools and folks were noticing, and I got asked to participate on a couple kind of large military credit groups, information and things going on at the state level, and then in 2014 timeframe, we passed Ohio House Bill 488, which required our public institutions to do quite a bit of work for higher ed. One of the things that required was that the state basically develop a process for statewide guarantees for military training. Basically, my position that I'm in now opened up, and the state, really was encouraging me, hey, you're one of the best at doing this in the state. Why don't you apply? And that's kind of how I ended up where I'm at. So my academic background is, I did an undergrad in geography and GIS remote sensing, and my master's in earth and environmental sciences and near surface geophysics, and I'm working in transfer credit. So it's interesting, but my one bit of advice with that is I would tell folks out there, if you're hiring or posting a job for transfer articulation, don't limit the degrees and information in there to, we want a master's in higher education. I think that is the worst thing you can absolutely do, because there's numerous people in our state agencies who have no degree background in higher ed, but have worked in it for years or decades with policy and everything else, and they just happen to have a different degree. So
Sure.
that's something that always kind of bugs me when they're like, oh, we want this specific degree. And it's like, well, maybe if you're in that particular program, I can understand it. But if it's a broad sense position,
Sure.
Be open to other folks, because I'm a prime example of learning all of this. And my background is definitely not higher education.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like that's got to be not your specific path, obviously, but other people come into the field that maybe their schoolwork didn't scream that I was going to work with transfer students. But even on that sense, I would say there's not many programs that focus on transfer students or students at community colleges or anything like that. You'll find a couple classes here and there. There's a few programs, yes, I know, for the people that are about to give me crap for that. Like, I do understand, but a lot of us that do work in transfer land and might not, I mean, a lot of not maybe a lot, I'm not going to just speculate on the number, but there are plenty of people around the state that also help military students, veterans that weren't veterans themselves. They just sometimes stumble into that position, and then you start to like the student population you're working with and such. So I think that's good advice, for sure, for hiring managers and stuff, that there are a lot of bright people out there. Might not have the one degree that you're thinking of, or the one that you came out with, and that you want to see more of the same. So thanks for the insight on that. It's always nice to hear your journey and stuff and how you've gotten there. So speaking of those past experiences, do you think, I have to think that the answer is yes, but how do you think that those experiences currently help you with working with the students that maybe you did at Wright State, but specifically the students that you're working for now?
So for me as a student, I kind of realized, I don't know, what I got for credit and what I didn't get for credit, and what bugged me and didn't bug me about that. Even at that point in time, I had my military credit, which was largely electives, but it was still useful. And I had some AP credit, and I'm one of those weird folks that got out and did my bachelor's in 3 years. Got done, and really that experience alone, and some of the issues I thought didn't make any sense with military credit, sort of just was always in the back of my head. So once I started that role and doing that job, I thought, I'm the person who can kind of change this and help these students. So I started making that difference, and I still had a lot of really good relationships with a lot of student veterans at that time because I just graduated and most of my
Sure.
friends were still attending.
Yep.
And one of them that really pushed me over the top, and I can't remember the student's particular degree program, but he he needed like a two hour or maybe 3 hour basically physical education course um, to do something. And he was like, man, I'm not going to be able to graduate this summer. I'm going to have to go till the fall because I have to take this stupid, phys ed course. And he's like, the only thing I can find, and I can't remember exactly what it was now. I don't remember if it was like basketball or bicycling or something, whatever.
Right.
But he's like, yeah, I got to take this. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, dude, you were, and for those of you who aren't veterans might not understand, but I was like, you were an Army Ranger. I was like, you not only did the whole Army infantry training and hardcore physical ed, like you went to Ranger school, and that's a whole
Yeah.
different can of worms. And it's insane. I was like, didn't that stuff on your transcript like count for that? And he's like, man, I don't know. He's like, I've never even known I could do any of that. And at that point in time, it was sort of like the light went off in my head. I was like, I'm the person who can do that. And I was like, give me a couple days and I'm going to call you back.
Yeah.
So I went and pulled up his transcript, and sure enough, he had like tons of hours of physical education on there. But it was all had been left as like generic transfer credit. So it had no indicator that it was physical education in any way, shape, or form. So
Sure.
that caused me to like completely overhaul the system, how the military credit came in, to always give it designations for appropriate department codes, like if it's communications credit, communications, physical education, the physical education, HPR at that point in time, or if it's business, give it business, not just generic transfer XXXXX, whatever, on there. And so I did that, translated that into his physical ed. The advisor picked it up, plugged it in, and he was able to graduate that summer. So I called him back and was like, "Hey, dude, you don't need that credit anymore. You can drop that course. You're done." And he was just ecstatic, over the moon, happy with
Yeah.
it. And that was sort of, like in the world of transfer credit, that's kind of the gateway drug that gets you started when you have like that super successful story
Yeah.
of a student, like you get hooked, and that's really what happened. I started being super gung ho about helping those students. Um, I had been in that same situation, so I kind of knew and understood that and whatnot. And now at the state level, I don't get to work with students as much, but it's kind of I'm telling myself that it's sort of the broad scale. Like if I can get MTAGs or policy or something put in place, like I'm impacting all of our public institutions, and that's
Yes, you
good
are.
stuff for all students, even though they'll most likely never know my name in any way, shape, or form. And never know I was involved with that. Like it's still
Yeah.
laying the foundation. It's still doing what's right, and getting that stuff done. And frankly, I've always offered to assist schools. It's pretty common that I probably get at least, I'd say maybe 3 times or so a month, an institution is sending me some type of military transcript they've received, with all of the PII blacked out, so nobody freaks out there that we're breaking FERPA. Uh, Everything's blacked out that needs to be identifiable. But they'll say, "Can you help me understand this or work with this?" And
Right.
I'll work, with them and that student and get stuff squared away. So I don't
Nice.
work with students as much as I used to, which does make me a little bit sad, but I have to keep kind of the big picture in mind of helping and whatnot. So
Right. The life of a
I,
public servant.
yep, yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. Well, you drank the Kool-Aid and you were instantly hooked.
Yep.
I do like the expression you use. That's really funny, but that's an awesome success story. And I'm sure maybe that was the first or one of the first that you did and it was for a friend. But I mean, I'm sure you have done that quite a few times in your tenure, working at an institution. And I'm sure those listening that help military students here on listening in right now. I mean, I'm sure everyone's got a cool story like that where you really went above and beyond, and like that's got to make you feel good. That person doesn't have to take a basketball course or whatever in that case. But I mean, how many times there's even like a CPR class or something? Like
Yeah.
sometimes it is so small and just when you read the transcript, it is right in front of you. But when it's first getting processed, you're right. A lot of times general elective credit, whatever your institution calls them, is what people look for at first. But I mean, it's best to take the time, and you're right. Every time that an MTAG is created and that's an automatic thing, that's another student, that's another tens, hundreds of students that you're helping out every time that you do that.
Yep,
So,
exactly.
they don't know your name, but we know your name, and they certainly are benefiting from your work. So speaking of your work, could you let us know some of the work, oh my goodness, some of the projects that you have been working on, and if there's anything that you've been working on that like particularly is exciting you right now?
Yeah, a few different things. So obviously, I would say there's always an ongoing search for military transfer assurance guides, the MTAGs. So for those of you who might not be familiar with that term, it's basically a statewide guaranteed transfer course for military credit. So once it's evaluated at the state level and the faculty make that decision, not me, not Department of Higher Ed, not the OATN, the faculty make that decision. We send out a memo to all the institutions saying this course equals this course, and then everybody can post it in their system. When the student shows up with that credit, it's there. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that. So that's sort of a always ongoing part of my job. A couple other things that are going on right now, which really could be a full blown presentation, is kicking off a pay for success project that's going to involve the National Guard, and largely the National Guard with some type of ties to Northeast Ohio. So basically, Cuyahoga County and the surrounding counties. The funding came from Cuyahoga County, and so that's why those counties are picked. But it's looking at improving essentially all the learning outcomes for the Guard. So this is really the first time we're looking at any military related entity for student success, basically. And we picked the Guard because we figured we would have a better way of tracking them since they're utilizing, a state scholarship program. We want them to be actually using the scholarship. So basically, the criteria is looking at students. They have to volunteer to participate in this. It's essentially a coaching type program for them, but they have to either be from one of those counties or from somewhere else in Ohio and attending school in Cuyahoga County. So there's kind of an either or type of approach. So some type of tie basically to Cuyahoga County, and whatnot. So without going into a rabbit hole with this, basically we're looking at this project, and the National Guard is looking at this from the perspective of we need to help our recruiting. So we want students to be successful with this Guard scholarship because that's a big recruiting factor for the National Guard. But also they realize that there's a pretty good population of students that sign up for the National Guard scholarship program. They attend courses for about a semester or two, and then they just disappear. And a couple things have recently changed to impact that. One of them is the Guard scholarship used to only be used for associate degrees and bachelor's degrees, and now it can be used for certificates and licenses and certifications. So
nice.
That was a big step change and part of this project as well, to really make sure students can actually enroll and do things that they want to do. So, in the past, one of the things that could have showed up as a failure is, if a student wanted to do, say, Police Officer Training Academy, they couldn't just sign up and do Police Officer Training Academy. They had to enroll in a baccalaureate or an associate program and also take those courses. And then in most cases, when they did a certification that they wanted, when they were done, they stopped. I mean, that's all they wanted. So on paper, that looks really bad because you're like, these students are all dropping out or whatever. But then there's also kind of this portion of students who probably had no real vision or guidance when they enrolled, and they've just dropped out and essentially wasted state dollars, basically. I mean, that's what it really comes down to. It's a state funded scholarship. It's all of our taxpayer money. So this is hopefully going to improve those outcomes for those folks. Nice. One of the things we're also looking at is, time to completion. For those of you who worked with National Guard students, you know that they only have so many units of benefit that don't directly correlate to semester hours, but they do in this weird little calculation and and whatnot. But it's basically set up that you do your associate degree in 2 years and your baccalaureate in 4 years, and that's all the funding that you get. So part of this project is to really track that and see, is that still useful for this scholarship program, or do we need to change it? Are we going to come out of this and get data that says, none of the baccalaureate people completed in 4 years. They all had to take on some student loans or something like that. I think that would be a big eye-opening, potential result for this study, and whatnot. And we'll just see where that goes. So that's just one of the things that we're kind of looking at, but we're hoping to see an improvement in graduation and retention, certificate completion, all of that stuff. And their population, for the most part, I'll say generically kind of mirrors the straight out of high school populations,
Okay.
statistics wise.
Yep.
But I would say most of those groups, and especially in the minority groups, their completion rates and stuff are usually just a tiny smidgen higher than straight out of high school. So they have a little bit of benefit of sort of that military bump or whatever you want to call it, that helps them a little bit. But they're pretty comparable to first year student when you look at completion rates. So
Nice.
yeah, that's a big thing that has some big ramifications coming down the line. And I'm really hoping once we start getting some good data in, there'll probably be presentations and things that I do to talk about that a little bit more. And the other thing I would mention that's sort of wrapping up right now is last year we unveiled the Collegiate Purple Star designation for institutions, which is basically a way of saying our school is military friendly. Um, there's a pretty good amount of items that a school needs to submit in an application to say that we're in fact military friendly. So it's
Hmm.
not just like we're awarding a designation saying, "Hey, you you volunteered to get this and you got it. Congrats." They actually have to submit quite a bit of stuff to us. Um, so each year we do 2 cycles, a spring and fall. So the fall cycle just wrapped up kind of mid-October, and our committee that reviews it is still reviewing it right now. So the next batch of those schools that get the designation should be announced probably around the Veterans Day timeframe is typically when it is. So we should have a few more schools that get added to that. So it's good to see institutions get that designation because there's a lot involved in that as well, and certain guarantees that the schools have to be evaluating, like the military transfer credit and things like that. So it's good to see. So that's the main stuff
Yep.
right now.
Very cool. Um, Obviously, you work, you are an employee of our state government. So, I mean, you are a public employee. We obviously there's a lot of public institutions in Ohio, but OTC certainly we have tons of private institutions that are also part of our membership, and there's a lot of great people that do really good work even on the private side, which I'm sure you hear something about them, even if it's not like you can't mandate a private institution to do something, but is there anything of your work that you would recommend or like say, this would be a good thing to replicate at a private institution, or do you have any sort of like
Mhm.
advice, I guess, for those of our
Yep.
memberships that do work at private
So
institutions?
I would say times are changing quite fast and dramatically. So when I started at higher ed, my first year with the department, myself and the chancellor did a lot of tours of college campuses and veteran centers. At that point in time, I'd say the majority of private institutions we went to had very little services for veterans. Majority were not awarding any military credit and really weren't doing much of anything. That has changed night and day, which is excellent to see.
Yeah.
So one of the things, and I just mentioned it in your last question, is that Collegiate Purple Star designation. So part of that, private institutions can apply and earn that, and many have. I think 16
Awesome.
have up to this point in time, and there's a couple
Yeah.
that have applied this cycle. So I imagine there might be some more get that. But one of the requirements in there is that they actually have to follow the legislation that exists for the public institutions. So that's
Okay.
like 110% voluntary for them to do that. And I think it's awesome that a private institution will step to the plate and come up and say, "Hey, we're willing to do this." Um, I would say pretty much everything is really applicable across the board. I've had numerous private institutions reach out to me with the exact same transfer questions, same stuff, and I usually can give them guidance and say, "This is what I would recommend," and or look at your particular policy around this and see what that says, type of thing. I always tell them, even though you're not participating in our statewide credit transfer guarantee system, where the M tags are used. If you have a degree audit type system or use transferology, any of that type of stuff, you can absolutely reverse engineer military equivalencies with your school. If you're comfortable saying this military course equals this at Ohio State and Kent State and Akron or whatever, and you already have that equivalency in your system,
Right.
well, that same faculty panel has made that decision for the military. Like you could literally use our system to say, well, we're going to count that military credit in the exact same way we count it from those other public institutions.
Right.
I've always told them you can reverse engineer M tags and have those equivalencies on your campus. Like that's an excellent starting point for any of that work. Um, and whatnot. And I would say the same thing too for public institutions for military training that's not MTAGs, as stuff that's not tied to a statewide guarantee. You can pull up schools equivalencies in transferology and see what you have equivalencies with that they do, and what you could try to count or not count, and all that type of work. So I would say there's really nothing that is totally off limits for a private institution to ask for help, or ask questions. I think as I do statewide trainings now, the not only are the publics going to be invited, I would highly assume that we'll probably be inviting the private institutions who are collegiate Purple Stars, because they're going to have to know how to do some of this stuff. And I think they want to. They want to learn more, and they're already, in most of those cases, already doing a good job. So times are definitely changing with that, and military credit's one way that is, really
Yeah.
leading the way too.
That's awesome. And even from like a student perspective, like let's say, I don't know, you're a student, you're in Southwest Ohio, and you're looking at two public institutions and a private institution, and you can kind of see like, I have military credit. Here's how the two public institutions handled it. And then if you're the private institution, if you're taking the same streamline effect, I think to the student, that's going to look like consistency above all kind of a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you are the private and you go above and beyond, obviously that makes you look great. But if you're offering a lot of the same services or similar equivalencies and things like that, then it comes, the students, the vet's college decision is going to be a bit more down to, your campus or whatever brass tacks you get into. So I think that's great advice for them. Along the same lines as giving advice to people, obviously transfer and military credit wise, they intersect, but even so, transfer world and military land do intersect in other ways as well. Is there any pieces of advice that you do have for professionals that do work with active military and veteran students?
Yep. I mean, it sort of depends on what areas you're in, but one of the things I would say is find some champions on your campus, especially if they're faculty members. Get the feelers out. Find somebody who wants to help military students, or find somebody who's a veteran themselves that's teaching in some department or whatever, and just make that person your contact for that department. Hey, I have military transfer equivalencies. I'm going to send them to that person. And that's not to try to, gain some type of favor or something. It's just because there's not as big of a learning curve for those individuals. It's if you have faculty in a department and none of them are veterans, and this happens to me all the time, you're reaching out to them, you basically have to have a whole separate meeting to kind of explain this is what the training was. Yes, this was only a 6-week course, and you initially think this could never be 3 semester hours, but it was all day, every day training, way more contact hours than your course, in some cases double or triple the contact hours, and just explaining all of that, and explaining how rank works and how just all of those elements of military. It's a big learning curve for folks that are not military, and that's a big issue. So anybody that you can find on campus that's a veteran advocate, friend, make friends with them. If you're a transfer person, try to find another staff member, even who was a veteran. You can say, hey, would you mind if I asked you some questions about military transcripts? Because they'll be able to help you out to some extent. They might not know the policies or who things have to go to, but they can at least give you some information. So learn who those individuals are, and whatnot on your campus. I think that's a big thing. And then really just if you're that person who's working with those transfer students and the military and veteran students, just trying to learn that stuff yourself a little bit. Take some time every now and then to look at stuff on a joint service transcript or a community college of the Air Force transcript, and just try to figure out, what does this mean? Do I understand this correctly? That type of thing. How are we processing credit at our institution? Ask some questions. Is there any way that you could be processing credit better? Like I said, the low-hanging fruit for me was morphing the military titles into the credit recommendations as far as credit, because if you submit a course to a faculty, they're not going to know what the military often names their courses after a weapons system, like, oh, we have a ANP 5/something PQ maintainer. like they have no idea what that course is
Sure.
or what credit is. But oh, if you send it to them and it says, oh, there's AC circuits and DC circuits and digital electron, like, oh, okay, yeah, we have those
Yeah.
courses. I can figure this out now, type of thing. So figure out, that process that works for you. And part of that too, I would say, is learn and advocate for really any type of prior learning assessment, especially portfolio evaluations, because there's a lot of things that's done in the military too that doesn't really show up on transcripts, that they have excellent experience in. Some of those are like cultural awareness training, like that's a prime one. We've done a couple training sessions about that a few years ago, about how often when they deploy overseas to some basically a non-Western country, they essentially go through some type of a course. They're often given reading materials about that country. The military usually pays for people from that country to come and talk to them about customs and everything that you want for somebody to learn, for this Western person to go into, a Middle Eastern country or Eastern Europe or whatever, um, and learn. And, a lot of our institutions, probably just about all of them, have some type of a multicultural
Yeah.
competency requirement or something in the education block. And just figuring out ways like that you can advocate for students.
Yeah.
If you're straight out of high school student can come to you and do a study abroad program over the summer and get those requirements waived on your campus, then why can't you do that for the guy who spent 3-4 years in Afghanistan or Iraq or Kuwait or wherever in North Africa for the same kind of thing? I mean, they didn't, in most cases, they probably weren't tied to a desk the entire time. They ventured out. The
Yeah.
military hires contractors that are local people. Like they had some interaction. And then it's up to you as an institution, how comfortable you are with saying, yes, we will award that, or you need to at least, write a portfolio about it and explain,
Hmm.
what did you learn, type of thing, and that type of stuff. So
Yeah.
I'll leave that open for the institution, obviously. But anything like that you can advocate for students is what I would say. You're hearing about, you know, right now there's a lot of talk about the equity discussion and equity gaps and things like that. You can apply that exact same mentality for the military as well, and look at your programs and see what is a barrier, to what they're doing and whatnot, and just kind of go over that with a fine tooth comb and think, if I served 4 years or something in the military and came and I was applying to this program, what what's there, what's not there,
Right.
does that need to happen? If the military is requiring high school transcript as part of your enlistment processes, this probably be sacrilegious to some schools, but do you need to require that for an admissions decision if they're from the military? Do you require that if they're a transfer student? What is a military transfer student to you? Like,
Yeah.
what is that definition? All of those types of questions. Like, I would say be an advocate for the military student, that veteran, and push those kind of norms that exist and have
Sure.
existed for decades and decades, because some of that stuff just needs to change and be updated. And frankly, a lot of it just doesn't make common sense.
Right.
And in certain fields, a few years ago, we kind of had some breakthrough in the world of nursing for military medics coming in, because I sat down with most of the nursing faculty around the state. A lot of programs at that point in time still required, and some still do, the STNA training to in process into the program. And I was like, look, they just did this medical training. Here is all the outcomes that they learned. This is, I think it's like 5 or 6 times the amount of training that they do for STNA. I mean,
Sure.
significant. Like the STNA is like, I think it was a 70-hour course, maybe a 90-hour course, and the military is like a 600-hour course with
Yeah.
drastically more outcomes. And I was like, and you're asking this student who did this to go take the STNA training? Like, to
Sure.
them, that's just a slap in the face and a waste of time and money. I mean, they'll do it. You just told them to do it, but
Yeah.
do you really need to do it? So that's sort of the overall advice, is just looking at things like that exist in your system, and does it need to change and be updated?
Yeah. No, I think that those are really great pieces of advice, because I think, and this is, I'm not a veteran, as well, I didn't say that out loud, but I'm not. So the first time you work with a veteran student or someone who is active guard or whatever, and they start bringing you these forms, you're like, what does this even mean? Or like, I will say, so higher ed is bad enough with acronyms, right? We all know
Absolutely.
the military does love their acronyms as well. They're just different acronyms than our acronyms. And then you've got two sets of acronyms that then coincide and overlap with one another. So it gets incredibly confusing for the student. It can be incredibly confusing for the professional in this sense. So I think your first point about finding your people on campus, whether they are, like I said earlier, not everyone that works with veteran students are veterans themselves, but that first conversation or whatever, they were just as clueless as you. A veteran might have a leg up on you in that sense because they at least may know some of the jargon, but even the transfer credit piece, obviously it's all, it takes time. And if you've ever worked with a vet student, like they're very understanding, they're very calm about everything. They'll do exactly, I joked with you beforehand, but veteran students are some of the, most engaged students that I work with, because I'll ask them to do something and then they'll come back the next day and be like, yeah, I did that already. And you're just like, oh, usually the students I talk to, like that takes them a week or two to do it. And they're always just like, wham, bam, done with everything. So find the people on your campus, your champions, whether faculty, staff members, whoever, and then just be patient and just know that we're trying to fit military students, so active or veterans, into these bubbles that already exist on our campus. So you said like the first year student, well, even if you went from high school, did 4 years, did tours, and then you came back and you're going to school at 22, you're a little different than that 18-year-old version of yourself that you were, when you were back in high school and stuff. And for transfer students, it's the same thing. Like, yes, you're transferring credit, so you're falling into that bubble, but your experience coming into college is vastly different than a student that spent a couple years at a community college, spent a year out of state and is transferring home, whatever. So just to know that if there are those little changes, even if they are little sometimes, that you can make for that student, like you said, the application. Do you need every one of the exact same forms for a student who's 22 or older, 30, a vet, whatever, for them to meet your admissions requirements? Or is there some sort of a subcategory that you can come up with to kind of, maybe they do overlap as a transfer student, but then you can say that, hey, we have X, Y, and Z already because of their JST or whatever. So that's all really great advice. And maybe I just synthesized it for you a bit, but you did a better job saying it. But we're pretty much, right at the end of this. I just wanted to ask, like, is there anything else that you would like to add that I forgot to bring up?
Gosh, that's tough. I guess I would just end it, kind of the same way of what I was saying in the last, question was just being that advocate, being open-minded, willing to learn and help those students out and be an advocate for them. The acronyms, that's a big barrier. And it's almost like, you almost need a translator sometimes to figure out what's going on where. But, I would also say, and really you could say this to probably brand new, straight out of high school freshmen, like there's a lot of things in the world of colleges and universities that just don't quite make sense sometimes. And, it's really easy to go tell a student, oh, you need to go see the registrar and the bursar, and you're using these terms that, nobody else in
Yeah,
normal society uses that terminology
right.
anymore. And you kind of make these assumptions that they know where those places are and what they need to do. And it's like, sometimes just take that extra second to be like, go see these folks. They will help you get registered for your classes and do this, or, you need to get your financial aid straightened out and do that. Any of that stuff is just being an advocate for students. And I would also say, kind of on a side note with the veterans, don't just assume that because they have the GI Bill or something like that, that they've got everything paid for and covered, because sometimes that's not the case. I would definitely encourage every veteran military student you see to fill out the FAFSA. Get that done and in, because there's a lot of aid that they might qualify for, grants they might qualify for. Um, and likewise, always ask a student if they're a military veteran, are you using your GI Bill, especially if you're recommending, you need to change this course or drop out of this course or that course, because sometimes that can have some big financial aid impacts on the student that you might not be aware of as an advisor.
Yeah.
So it might be good to say, hey, I'm thinking about recommending you drop these two courses. That's going to take you from full time to part time or whatever. Let me call the Veteran Center on our campus and see what that's going to do. or can we swap that out with something else to figure out some better balance, or those types of questions, because
Yeah,
a lot of times advisors will make a decision like that and they don't really think about any of the
sure.
federal benefits attached to that student, and certain things can get drastically changed, or oh, you dropped out of this course, now you have to pay the VA back a whole bunch of money, and they might not have
Yeah,
that at that point
of
in time,
course.
and then that might cause them to not enroll in the next term, and you're
Sure.
starting a downward spiral. So just being in tune with what's going on, offer support, ask questions,
Yeah,
and know who your contacts are on campus. Like I said, if you have a veteran center, get familiar with that person. Don't be afraid to ask them questions, and if they don't know, I'm sure they will forward them to somebody else, or tell you I can't help you with that. But most of those folks that I work with quite a bit, they're all very nice individuals. They know a lot of different people on campus to help with a lot of different issues, so
yeah,
they're a good person to get to know.
yeah. It's great advice. So thank you, Jared. We've had, pretty good length conversation about all this stuff. So I think we got a lot covered today. I don't think we solved every problem in military land and transfer land, of course, but maybe these are some things for our peeps to take back to their institutions and maybe have a conversation about with their higher ups or the people around them. Maybe they're going to find the veteran or the military champions on their campus to kind of help them out, because our causes, they are of one the same, but they also do run
Yep,
parallel to one another. So
absolutely.
they're non-traditional students in a sense. We need to take our time and be genuine and be thoughtful with how we approach them. So I do appreciate you joining me. This again, this was episode 11 of PodTC. We'll have one more to rein in, the rest of 2023. Be on the lookout for that in December. But we'll see you guys then.
All right, thank you.